Book discussion, Herve Le Tellier, L'Anomaly. I read the book in German actually. My French is not that good, and I chose to read it in a European language if I do a translation. So the book is written in French. Hervé is a Parisian author, very prolific author. I haven't read anything from him, and this book is very interesting book. I think I would say it's interesting. It's a little bit um, it flattens out towards the end. Let me say that. So it's one of those types of books that the story is incredibly interesting, but it's almost too absurd. I lack a little bit the connection with something. I don't want to say reality because that's not what I look for. But when I go through the plot and all these things, I hope it will become clearer. So, in this prelude, all I want to say is just to remind people the reason I talk about books on this podcast is the purpose of this podcast is to give people a sense of what it feels like to run a hedge fund. So, this is the fundamental purpose of this podcast. Now, book discussions have two reasons. One is I consider reading not just a pastime of a hedge fund manager, but actually part of the job because it's conditioning of the mind. Reading stories, reading fiction, nonfiction, biography, whatever it may be, it helps us. I think we humans are evolved to respond to stories. Angus Fletcher speaks about this a lot. Jordan Peterson, lots of other people have, I think, a lot of interesting things to say about narratives and why they're so important and so good and this and that. I think for me, as a person, it just really helps me condition my mind. It opens up synapses. It just opens up creativity. It opens up new thoughts. It's a little bit like dreaming, in a sense that I think just through running a story and sometimes maybe like it, not like it, whatever it may be, it just sort of wakes you up. So that's, like I say many times, it's conditioning of the mind. And then the second reason is also it's a record for me to just have a spoken record of my readings that can help. I often go back years back and see what I read and what I thought about these books. So this is Not Even Wrong podcast. It's January 12, 2022. This is Delco for the day. The fund is up 2.1%. The market's up 25 basis points. For the year, we are up 10 basis points. The market's down 75 basis points. We're outperforming by 85 basis points. Today, we have a good performance by Tesla and a not so good performance by the biotech index in particular. Intellia is down quite a bit. So we're losing about 60 basis points on our biotech positions. Now, I had a very positive podcast yesterday about biotech. We believe it's time for M&A, but whenever these types of vectors come together, so on the one hand, low valuations, on the other hand, people interested in buying companies, there is a J curve. There will be some more pain, I guess, until this starts to reverse. So we're still very happy about the biotech positions, but certainly not happy about the performance. The JP Morgan conference is going on right now. It's virtual, but nevertheless, it's going on, and there are pre-announcements, there are talks that companies are giving that I guess are delivering this type of underperformance or are the main reason for the underperformance. But let's talk about Hervé's book now. So L'Anomaly, here's a quick summary of the plot without giving too much away. So an airplane flies through turbulences from Paris to London and then eventually lands. It turns out that the same airplane landed 3 months ago with the same exact people. So what happens is we have a situation where basically people, an airplane, everything got duplicated. Somehow the same exact people, so we're not talking about doppelgangers here or anything like that. These are the same exact people that land 3 months later in somewhere in the U.S. They get diverted by the Federal Aviation Administration, and they get diverted, and then the FBI gets involved, and then the whole story evolves around this topic of basically imagine if you met yourself. So there's somebody, there's your person, you are duplicated. Okay, so this is it, and I hope, excuse me. I hope my prelude comment of absurdity now gets a little bit more flesh around the bone. So this is the problem, okay? This is, of course, a phenomenal setup for a story. I mean, imagine what happens now. This is exactly what happens. We have maybe half a dozen of stories. So the way it's written, Hervé is, I don't know if he's a film writer, but he certainly writes the book in sort of a film type mode, in a script type mode. So there's a character build up. There are different types of characters. There's a serial killer. There's a musician. There's an architect. There's a woman that is has an unhappy marriage. So there's different types of people that we get introduced to, and all those people are in that plane. So those people then meet their sort of duplicate, and then the story evolves around how they meet each other and what they talk to each other and how they actually react to the fact that there's somebody out there who is them. So this is the gist of the story. That's it. And I think that it's interesting. It's inspiring, but on some weird way, it's almost like, yeah. I mean, of course, if you set a story up like that, it is weird. So there's a little bit of that, but nevertheless, I would say I would still give it 4 stars out of 5. It's interesting enough, and I would watch a movie. There's a movie actually, Manifest, on Netflix that I think deals with similar things. It's not based on the book, but it kind of deals with similar things. So maybe I'll watch it. So it's okay. But let me now talk about some of the takeaways that I get. And here's the first and foremost most important takeaway, and this is, I think, pretty relevant. My biggest takeaway in this book actually has nothing to do with the concept of, well, how is this possible that something gets duplicated, which is being discussed in the book. There's scenes where scientists and religious people are talking about, okay, well, how is this even possible? So all these questions come up. That's not the point. But my point is that what comes across in this book is the power of the state. And I don't know if Hervé did this on purpose. If he did it, he's very smart because it's kind of subtle. But he just shows how there's something unusual happens, and the state, the government, the FBI, the NSA, the army, everybody starts getting involved, and everybody starts making decisions, and people start being coerced. And this, to me, is the biggest message in this book, because we are living in exactly those types of times right now. This is exactly what's going on with the pandemic right now. We have a very unusual, actually uncomfortable situation going on. And the answer, the response by politics, by people in power, is to coerce us. This is, in a nutshell, what's going on in this book, and this is what stood out to me. And it's one of my biggest concerns that I have. I feel incredibly uncomfortable, not because of the pandemic, not because I'm afraid of the pandemic or for my loved ones, and none of that stuff. I think we can deal with it. We can be careful. We can take care of our health the same way we do it all the time, and we can also take care of our neighbors and all these things. But the coercion of the state, in some places more than in others, is unbelievable and scary and a problem. And this, in my view, this is the biggest takeaway in this book. There's a lot of scenes where FBI agents get involved. They just take themselves into a position of power. There's no questioning of, hey, do I even have the right to do this, or can I just put people, let's say, away because of, in the name of national security, all that stuff. It's a little bit concerning. So this is, the biggest takeaway for me, and I'm sure other people would be like, why is this even a point? I pay attention to these things now because I haven't paid attention. I mean, just this is I'm on a tangent now, but I just saw an interview with the leader of Bayern in Germany, so the Ministerpräsident Stoiber in Bayern, and it's just an interview, nothing big, but the camera shows how he gets to the interview in a black limo with bodyguards. I'm a bit more sensitive to these things, and I don't know, maybe it's always been like that. I just feel like there's a big important person coming because this person has power, because they can do whatever they want. They can put us in lockdowns. They can make decisions about, let's say in this case, it was about should there be soccer games and all those kinds of things. And you know, I just feel like we're in a time of coercion, and we need to make sure that what we fought for 250 years of enlightenment and and freedom and free will and all these things, that we fight for those things even in the context of a threat like the pandemic. So this, again, one of the biggest takeaways in this book. Another takeaway in the book, of course, is the question of science. And I think Herve does a very good job in um, bringing in um, all kinds of scientists, because what happens is, okay, we have a duplication of something. For some reason, an airplane with duplicate people lands on U.S. soil. So clearly, this is a problem. How can we? That's why the book's called Anomaly, the anomaly. I mean, whenever we have something like that, we have to start questioning everything we know about science. And everybody does a decent job. He talks about wormholes and copying. He doesn't talk about multiverse and quantum physics and all that stuff, which I'm surprised, actually. He could have just spoken about the multiverse, maybe, because this would have been almost a layup. Maybe Herve is not familiar with it, or he just wanted to leave that out, because the multiverse interpretation of quantum physics is, of course, controversial in itself. But this could have been a very nice way to interpret what happened in this book. He doesn't talk about it, but and that, it's actually not important. I think Herve doesn't pay too much importance to explaining actually how this duplication happened. What he does, though, he brings in the process of how people talk to each other, how people think about these things, how people also, there's, of course, politics within science, all of these things surface. The same exact thing happens on the spiritual side. So there's a scene where spiritual leaders from all big religions are brought in and discuss this, and there's a fear by the FBI that religious backlash can happen, because you're not supposed to be duplicated, only God can duplicate you and all that stuff. So there's some of that happening, but I think that was a decent job by Herve. I think lastly, of course, and I think that's probably what most people would take away from this book, is, of course, all the encounters of the me with the other me, right? So you have, like I said, about six people, maybe half a dozen, maybe a little bit more, of characters that then meet themselves again. There are people, bad people, good people, bad things happen, lots of things happen, lots of excuse my French, shit gets uncovered from under the rug. A lot of things happen, and that's interesting, a little bit expected, a little bit uninspiring, in the sense that, yeah, I would expect that. So kind of Herve lets me down here a little bit from a narrative, fiction, tension perspective, because you kind of would expect a lot of that stuff. So, but nevertheless, good job. I think, to summarize, the book is worth a read. It's like, I think with somebody in the review said, it's a nice combination of literature and thriller. It's opens up questions of science for people maybe who aren't as deeply involved as I am into all these questions of reality. What is reality? What is quantum physics? Interpretation of quantum physics. Do we perceive reality the way? What is actually? Are we just a program? Are we, questions like that come up, are we just sort of imagining what we see in sort of like a software type of way, or is there a real reality? So there's a lot of these questions that I think I personally struggle myself anyway already. And so this book, to me, is just another nice addition to this conversation. Maybe for other people it will be a nice introduction to these questions. So therefore, I think the book has some importance, I think much more than just a thriller. But there's also the thriller side of things, the nice tension. There's, like I said, there's some criminals in there. There's some love, sex. There's even some bad stuff happening. I don't want to give away too much. Bad things happen. People go to jail. So there's all kinds of things. Nice setups for narratives that make good movies with interesting actors. All that stuff. You can make a good movie out of this book. So, but again, I think there's also like I said in the review, there's this nice cross also with literature. I mean, it's nice literature. It's what I mean with literature is, it makes you think. It makes you. It's elegantly written. The wording is good. Even though I read a translation, doesn't matter. It's still, I can see the French. I'm sure, having read it in German and liked the language, I'm sure the French side of things is also very nice. I like elegant language. I like nice, beautiful things, and this is definitely one of those books that is just beautifully written. And I don't want to diminish the question of reality. Like I said, maybe I've been spending too much time thinking about this, so it doesn't really affect me that much when it comes to, yeah, I've seen this before, I've seen this conversation, I don't really want to talk too much about it, all that stuff. Uh, I would say that there's definitely more to say about these things, and I don't necessarily want to do it here. I mean, okay, let me do it. Let's real quick throw it out there. So we have the question of, okay, if it is possible that people get duplicated out of nothing, so people come out of nowhere, unexplainable to us. They're not born, they're not created through the evolutionary process of birth and all that. They just are duplicated. Then we have to ask ourselves questions of what is reality? And the question of reality then goes down to, okay, is what we perceive in the real world, is it something that's real, or is it just something in our software? And then when something like an anomaly happens, that means that's kind of our software is not able to read what's going on in reality. So it's on us. It's not, reality is what it is. Reality is the oracle. Whatever reality is, that's what's up. And it's our job to interpret that. And sometimes we can't interpret it, and that's when we actually learn. This is, I think, maybe also another subtle point in this book is that anomalies actually make us learn. This is exactly how science works. This is Thomas Kuhn in the paradigm shifts and the structure of scientific revolutions talks about this. How do scientific revolution happen? Well, it starts with anomalies, and then we start sort of asking questions, and then somehow the paradigm shift happens. It's one way to explain science. Maybe not the best way, but it's one way. And I think anomalies are very important. I think also when I was in my undergrad with Professor Frey in Zurich, he was talking a lot about anomalies, how he thinks economics progresses by looking at anomalies. So I think anomalies are an important factor in learning. And I think that's maybe, now that I'm talking, this is probably one of the things that the book also, in a subtle way, portrays. It's like, well, how do we learn? How do we question our spiritual and scientific foundation by being exposed to anomalies? And this is, of course, a huge anomaly, and it makes you think that there's no answers in the book. Don't expect any answers of, oh, how is this possible? Herve is not going that far. All he's doing is he's setting up the stage and then letting people react. And then again, my takeaways from the book are, on the one hand, we have the high involvement of the state. We have the way the scientific and spiritual community is talking about it, and then also we have the individual reactions to these unusual events. Thank you.